What kind of frustration can lead a seven-time world champion to describe his new stage at Ferrari as the worst experience of his career? And what relationship does all this have with the disqualification of the McLarens in Las Vegas? Las Vegas had become one of the most anticipated stages of the 2025 season. A night race in the heart of a city that breathes spectacle, lights, and risk. Everything pointed to the Las Vegas Grand Prix being a memorable event. And it was, although not for the reasons that McLaren nor Lewis Hamilton expected. The classification had left a grid full of tension. Lando Norris started from first position, with Verstappen in second position and Oscar Piastri in fifth position. The Woking team seemed to have the race under control, pace, strategy, and confidence. For more than 50 laps, they executed with surgical precision. After the race was over, and the podium ceremony ended, increasingly denser murmurs began to circulate in the paddock. FIA technicians had taken the two MCL39S to the technical verification area with one specific detail in mind: the wear of the flat bottom. 2 hours later, the bomb exploded. Both Norris and Piastri were disqualified for violating Article 3.5.9 of the technical regulations. The cause: wear less than the regulatory minimum on the rear skid block. The sanction was devastating, not only because of the result, but because of its surgical precision. Norris' car registered wear of 0.12 millimeters below the permitted threshold. Piastri's 0.26 millimeters. To anyone outside of F1, this may seem insignificant, but in the world of motorsport, it is catastrophic. We're talking about margins so fine that an average human hair would have been enough to make the difference between legal and illegal. The consequences were immediate. Max Verstappen, who had won the race, now found himself with an extended lead in the championship. Kimi Antonelli took the podium, and Hamilton, who had finished 10th on the track, rose positions almost by accident. However, that promotion was not cause for celebration. At the time of being interviewed, Lewis Hamilton, a driver accustomed to the spotlight, to success, to pressure, did not seem relieved by the points won. On the contrary, he paused for a long time and, with a hard expression, uttered a phrase that left the paddock silent. "This has been the worst experience of my entire career." And then he added, "Nothing works. I don't trust the car. I don't trust the system." McLaren's disqualification became an emotional trigger for Hamilton, because at that moment everything he had been repressing since he began his time with Ferrari came to light. It was not a simple complaint about a car that was difficult to handle. It was a declaration of helplessness, of accumulated frustration, from a pilot who has reached the top and who now, after months of fruitless adaptation, finds himself trapped in a project that does not fulfill what was promised. What emerged in his statements was not a passing complaint. It was a breakup confession. When Hamilton said, "I don't trust the system," he did so in the plural. He wasn't just talking about Ferrari. He was talking about the whole, the technical environment, the FIA, the sports management of current Formula One. What was perceived as frustration was actually disappointment, because Lewis Hamilton no longer sees this sport as a space where excellence can shine without obstacles. He sees a system trapped in micro details, in extreme penalties, in engineering policies where the margins for error are so narrow that even the best driver can be exposed if the team's algorithm fails by 1,000th. And that, for someone who has built his legacy on control, precision, and operational excellence, is deeply demoralizing. This emotional breakdown is not a sign of weakness. It's a warning. Because when the most successful driver in history starts to question the validity of the system, something in the sport needs to be reevaluated. His words were not an improvised vent. They were a cry from the trenches of the elite. And for that reason, they marked a before and after. McLaren's disqualification in Las Vegas was much more than a specific penalty. It was a silent warning that laid bare an uncomfortable truth about Formula One's technical present. In a sport that constantly pushes the limits of what is possible, where every millimeter of the car is designed to maximize performance within tiny legal margins, the line between innovation and infringement has become dangerously thin. And the McLaren case was the clearest proof of this. In technical terms, the infraction was millimetric. The flat bottom, also known as the skid block, recorded where below the allowed minimum of 9 millimeters. This, at first, may seem like a trivial failure. But in Formula One, the rules are written with surgical precision because the car's aerodynamic performance depends on the exact interaction between the vehicle's bottom and the asphalt. If the car runs too low, it gains a significant advantage in downforce. And that's why even a 0.12 millimeter infraction, like the one that affected Lando Norris, cannot be ignored. But the true dimension of the problem was not only in the value of the infringement. It was the cause. McLaren did not detect the problem in its previous simulations. During Friday's free practice, the team did not complete a long enough run in representative conditions to model the actual behavior of the car's underbody during a full race in Las Vegas. This means that a team leading the championship with world-class resources and advanced simulations failed at something as basic as long-race data validation. It was an error of process, not of intention. And that's what really set off alarm bells in the paddock. Because if McLaren, the strongest team of the season up to that point, could make a mistake by not adequately simulating the impact of porpoising and chassis rigidity on a track as irregular as Las Vegas, then everyone else was potentially at risk. This leads us to a deeper reflection. The current generation of cars, under the ground effect technical regulations, has led teams to walk a tightrope. The quest for greater downforce through the flat bottom requires cars to stay as close to the ground as possible, but without exceeding contact limits. An error in the ride height setting, in the suspension stiffness, or even in predicting how the asphalt will evolve during the race can result in a disqualification. The tolerance is so tight that it is literally decided by microns. And that is unsustainable in the long term. Furthermore, what happened with McLaren exposed a problem of over-reliance on simulation models. If a team had detected the potential wear and tear on real track, they probably would have adjusted the car's ride height or adopted a less aggressive setup strategy. But they blindly trusted his predictions. And that, in a sport where conditions change every minute, became a trap. The message was clear to the entire grid. No team, no matter how prepared it is exempt from falling. The penalty was technical, but its implications were philosophical. It forced everyone to re-evaluate their methods, their margins, and their trust in the data. And this is where the case becomes even more symbolic. Because while McLaren fell by 1/10 of a millimeter, Hamilton, who had publicly criticized the system minutes later, saw his position artificially improve. But in his mind, that didn't mean justice. It meant that the sport had transformed into a technical lottery where the margins are so narrow that even winning on the track guarantees nothing. McLaren's disqualification not only rewrote the standings, he rewrote the narrative of the season. And he revealed that in 2025, the championships could be decided not by overtaking or strategy, but by imperceptible errors that only a millimeter caliper can detect. A high-risk sport, yes, but also increasingly highly fragile. Hamilton's statements in Las Vegas not only shook the media and the paddock, they open a window to a question that until now seemed distant. What's next for Lewis Hamilton in his last stage in Formula One? Because when a driver with 7 world titles and more than a decade in the elite openly suggests that he has lost faith in the car, the team, and even the system, is not just a temporary crisis. This is a moment of breaking. The system sanctioned McLaren by a margin invisible to the human eye, but that decision, beyond legality, exposed the fragility of a championship that can change not because of talent on the track, but because of a microscopic deviation. And at the same time, it revealed the emotional crisis of a champion who has won everything, and who now faces not only a car that does not respond, but structure that seems indifferent to his legacy. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.